The cold October wind whipped across the old steel bridge as Jasmine Brooks felt her husband's hands against her back. For a split second, she thought he was being romantic, pulling her close to look at the moonlight dancing on the dark water below. They had walked this bridge so many times during their 10 years of marriage, holding hands and talking about their dreams. Tonight felt different. Tonight felt wrong. "David, what are you?" The words died in her throat as she felt the violent shove. Her body flew over the metal railing, her screams swallowed by the rushing wind. The last thing she saw was David's face, cold and empty, staring down at her as she fell toward the icy river 30 feet below. The water hit her like concrete. Pain shot through her ribs as she went under, the current immediately pulling her downstream. Jasmine had grown up swimming in Lake Michigan with her cousins every summer. Her grandmother always said, "Child, the water is your friend if you respect it." Those swimming lessons from when she was 8 years old kicked in as her survival instincts took over. She fought to the surface, gasping and choking, her heavy coat trying to drag her down. The bridge lights grew smaller as the current carried her away from where David stood. She could barely make out his figure, but he wasn't calling for help. He wasn't even moving. He was just watching. Jasmine's mind raced as she struggled to stay afloat. This wasn't an accident. Her own husband had tried to kill her. The man she had cooked Sunday dinners for, the man she had supported through his job losses, the man she had dreamed of having children with, he had pushed her off that bridge like she was nothing. The current swept her toward the riverbank where old willow trees hung their branches into the water. She grabbed onto the roots and bark, her hands raw and bleeding as she pulled herself up the muddy slope. Every breath felt like fire in her lungs. Her left ankle screamed with pain, probably twisted in the fall. But she was alive. Jasmine lay in the wet grass for what felt like hours, shivering and trying to understand what had just happened. Car lights occasionally swept across the bridge above, but she could see David was gone. He had left her there to die. As feeling slowly returned to her fingers and toes, Jasmine began crawling toward the road. She needed help, but more than that, she needed to understand why. Why had the man she loved tried to murder her? What had she done wrong? What had changed? A passing truck driver found her on Highway 47 around midnight. He was a kind black man named William who reminded her of her late father. He wrapped her in a blanket from his cab and drove her straight to County General Hospital. "Ma'am, you need to call the police," William said gently as they pulled into the emergency room parking lot. "Whatever happened to you, this ain't right." Jasmine nodded weakly. She knew he was right, but part of her still couldn't believe David had really tried to kill her. Maybe it was some kind of horrible mistake. Maybe he had been drinking and lost his temper. Maybe he panicked when she fell and ran away scared. But deep in her heart, she knew the truth. The look in his eyes before he pushed her. That was the look of a man who had made up his mind. He wanted her dead. The emergency room was busy for a Tuesday night. Nurse Patricia, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, helped Jasmine into a hospital gown and began checking her injuries. The questions came slowly at first. "Honey, how did you end up in the river? Can you tell me your name? Is there someone we can call for you?" Jasmine answered carefully. She gave them her name and address, but when they asked about emergency contacts, she hesitated. David was supposed to be her emergency contact. He was supposed to be the person who rushed to her side when she was hurt. Instead, he was the reason she was lying in this hospital bed. "My aunt," she finally whispered. "Sister Agnes Richardson on Grove Street. She's all the family I have left." As the nurse stepped out to make the call, Jasmine stared at the ceiling tiles and tried to piece together the events of the evening. David had suggested they take a walk after dinner. He had been quiet lately, distant. She thought maybe he was stressed about money again. His construction job had been slow this month. But now she remembered other things. The way he had been guarding his phone. The late nights when he claimed to be working overtime. The new cologne he wore that smelled too expensive for their budget. The way he had stopped touching her, stopped kissing her goodnight. Sister Agnes burst through the hospital room door at 2:30 a.m., still wearing her church clothes and house slippers. At 67, she moved like a woman half her age when her family needed her. She took one look at Jasmine's bruised face and swollen ankle and gathered her niece into her arms. "Baby girl, what happened to you?" For the first time since hitting the water, Jasmine broke down completely. The tears came in waves as she told her aunt everything. About the bridge, about David's cold stare, about nearly drowning in the river. Sister Agnes listened without interrupting, her weathered hands stroking Jasmine's hair the same way she had when Jasmine was little and had nightmares. When the story was finished, the older woman's jaw was set in a hard line. "That man tried to kill you," she said quietly. This wasn't some accident or fight that got out of hand. He planned this. But why? Jasmine whispered. What did I do wrong? Child, you didn't do nothing wrong. But David Brooks got something going on, and whatever it is, he thought getting rid of you was the answer. Sister Agnes stood up and straightened her shoulders. Well, he thought wrong. You're alive, and now we're gonna find out what this is really about. Detective Rivera arrived at the hospital around 4 a.m. He was a serious man with tired eyes who had seen too much violence in his 20 years on the force. He listened to Jasmine's story and took detailed notes, but his expression remained neutral. Mrs. Brooks, I have to ask, had you and your husband been fighting recently? No more than normal, Jasmine replied. We've been having money troubles, but nothing major. Any signs he might have been seeing someone else? The question hit Jasmine like another push off the bridge. She had been trying not to think about that possibility, but hearing it out loud made everything click into place. Maybe. He's been different lately. Distant. Detective Rivera nodded. We'll need to investigate this as an attempted murder case. Do you have somewhere safe to stay while we work on this? Sister Agnes spoke up immediately. She's staying with me. And she ain't going nowhere near that house until you catch that man. As the sun began to rise outside the hospital window, Jasmine realized her old life was over. Whatever happened next, she could never go back to being the woman who trusted David Brooks completely. But she was alive, and that meant she had a chance to find out why he had wanted her dead. More importantly, she had a chance to make sure he never got the opportunity to try again. 3 days later, Jasmine sat in Sister Agnes' living room, wrapped in her grandmother's old quilt and sipping sweet tea. Her ankle was in a walking boot, and the bruises on her ribs made every breath hurt, but she was getting stronger. More importantly, she was getting angry. The police had been to the house twice, but David was nowhere to be found. His truck was gone, and neighbors said they hadn't seen him since Monday night, the night he tried to kill her. Detective Rivera had put out a bolo alert, but so far, David Brooks had vanished. He's probably running scared, Sister Agnes said, settling into her favorite armchair with her own glass of tea. Man knows what he did. Jasmine stared out the window at the maple tree in her aunt's front yard. Its leaves were turning brilliant orange and red, the same colors as the sunset the night David pushed her. She couldn't stop replaying those final moments on the bridge, looking for clues she had missed. Aunt Agnes, do you think he planned this for a long time? The older woman considered the question carefully. Baby, I think something pushed him to it recently. David might be a lot of things, but he ain't smart enough to plan a murder months in advance. Something happened that made him desperate. A knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Sister Agnes peered through the curtains and frowned. It's that Thompson woman from down the street. What's she want? Mrs. Thompson was 71 years old and knew everything that happened in the neighborhood. She had lived on Grove Street for 40 years and considered herself the unofficial neighborhood watch. Sister Agnes opened the door cautiously. Agnes, I heard about what happened to your niece, Mrs. Thompson said, wringing her hands. I need to tell y'all something important. They invited her in, and Mrs. Thompson perched on the edge of the couch like a bird ready to fly away. Her gray hair was perfectly curled, and she clutched her purse tightly in her lap. I saw your husband's truck, honey, she said to Jasmine. Tuesday morning early. Maybe 6 a.m. He was parked outside that fancy apartment complex on Riverside Drive. Jasmine's heart skipped. Riverside Drive was on the other side of town, nowhere near David's job site or anywhere he had business being. You sure it was his truck? Sister Agnes asked. Honey, I know that beat-up blue Ford anywhere. Had that dent in the front bumper from when he hit your mailbox last Christmas. Mrs. Thompson leaned forward conspiratorially. But here's the thing, I seen that truck there before. Least 3 times in the past month. Always early morning, always parked in the same spot. Jasmine felt her stomach drop. What apartment complex? Riverview Apartments. You know, those new ones they built for the young professionals. Real expensive. After Mrs. Thompson left, Jasmine sat in stunned silence. David had been lying about working early shifts. He had been going to Riverview Apartments instead, spending time with someone who lived in a place they could never afford. We need to find out who lives there, Sister Agnes said firmly. How? I can't exactly go knocking on doors asking if anyone knows my husband. Sister Agnes smiled, and Jasmine recognized that look. It was the same expression her aunt had worn when she convinced the church board to let women serve as deacons, and when she organized the successful boycott of the grocery store that was overcharging black customers. Child, you forget I've been living in this town for 40 years. I know people who know people. Give me until tomorrow. That evening, Jasmine's phone rang for the first time since the incident. The caller ID showed her best friend Denise, who lived 2 states away. They had grown up together, gone to each other's weddings, and talked every week for the past 15 years. "Girl, I just heard what happened," Denise said, her voice shaking. "Are you okay? Where are you?" Jasmine filled her in on everything, grateful to have someone she could talk to who knew David almost as well as she did. Denise had been one of the few people who had always been honest about her concerns. "Jazz, I hate to say this, but I never trusted him completely," Denise admitted. "Remember last year when I visited? He kept checking his phone during dinner, and when you went to the bathroom he stepped outside to take a call. Said it was work, but who calls about construction jobs at 8 p.m. on a Sunday? Why didn't you tell me? Because you loved him and I hoped I was wrong. But now..." Denise paused. "Now I think you need to dig deeper. Find out what he's been hiding." The next morning, Sister Agnes returned from her errands with a satisfied expression. She had stopped by the beauty salon, the post office, and the corner store where all the neighborhood gossip eventually circulated. "Rebecca Stone," she announced, setting her purse down with a thump. 29 years old, works at that insurance company downtown. Moved to Riverview Apartments about 6 months ago. Drives a white Honda with a dent in the passenger door. Jasmine felt the name hit her like a physical blow. Rebecca. She had heard David mention that name before, claiming she was just someone from his job site's insurance office. But now it made sense. The phone calls, the new cologne, the distance between them. "How long do you think it's been going on?" Jasmine asked quietly. "Long enough for him to think killing you was better than getting a divorce," Sister Agnes replied bluntly. "Baby, this man was planning a whole new life with this woman, and you were in the way." The anger that had been building in Jasmine's chest suddenly exploded into something else. Determination. David had tried to murder her so he could start fresh with his mistress. He had looked her in the eyes and pushed her off a bridge like she meant nothing. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated her. That afternoon, Detective Rivera called with an update. "Mrs. Brooks, we've been trying to track your husband's movements. His credit card was used at a gas station in Kentucky yesterday, but the trail goes cold after that. However, we did find something interesting." "What?" "Your husband took out a life insurance policy on you 3 months ago. A big one. $500,000. The room started spinning. 3 months ago, David had suggested they should get life insurance, saying it was the responsible thing to do as a married couple. He had handled all the paperwork, saying he didn't want to bother her with the details. She had trusted him completely. "He was planning this," she whispered. "It's looking that way. The policy has a suicide clause that wouldn't pay out for 2 years, but if your death looked accidental." Detective Rivera's voice trailed off. After she hung up, Jasmine sat in Sister Agnes' kitchen and stared at her hands. Her wedding ring was still there, a simple gold band they had bought at the pawn shop when they were young and broke and madly in love. Or at least she thought they had been in love. "Take it off," Sister Agnes said gently. "What?" "That ring. Take it off. You ain't married to that man no more. Man who tries to kill you ain't your husband. He's your enemy." With trembling fingers, Jasmine slipped the ring off her finger. The pale stripe of skin underneath looked vulnerable and strange. She set the ring on the kitchen table and stared at it. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked. Sister Agnes reached across the table and took her hands. "Now, baby girl, we make sure David Brooks and his girlfriend pay for what they did. But we do it smart and we do it legal and we make sure they can never hurt you again." That night, lying in the guest room bed where she had slept as a child during summer visits, Jasmine made a decision. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to run. David had tried to erase her from the world, but she was still here, still breathing, still fighting. Tomorrow she would start building her case. She would find out everything about David's secret life with Rebecca Stone. She would gather evidence, work with the police, and make sure both of them faced justice. But more than that, she would reclaim her life. The woman who had trusted blindly and asked no questions was gone, swept away by the river current. The woman who remained was stronger, smarter, and absolutely determined to win. David Brooks had made the biggest mistake of his life when he failed to kill her. Now she was going to make sure he regretted it for the rest of his days. 2 weeks had passed since the bridge, and Jasmine was learning that survival was more than just not dying. It was about rebuilding yourself piece by piece until you were stronger than before. She had traded her walking boot for a regular shoe, and the bruises had faded from purple to yellow. More importantly, she had traded her grief for action. Sister Agnes' dining room table had become their command center. Spread across its surface were printed emails, phone records Detective Rivera had helped them obtain, and a growing timeline of David's deception. Jasmine had discovered she had a talent for investigation that she never knew existed. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a credit card statement. "Every Tuesday for the past 4 months, he bought coffee and bagels at that place near Riverview Apartments. $26 each time, enough for 2 people. Sister Agnes adjusted her reading glasses and leaned closer. "And here's a charge at Victoria's Secret 3 weeks ago. $68. You ever see any new underwear around the house?" Jasmine shook her head. The evidence was overwhelming. David hadn't just been having an affair. He had been living an entirely separate life with Rebecca Stone. The life insurance policy was just the final step in a plan to replace one woman with another. Pastor Mike knocked on the front door that afternoon, carrying a covered dish and wearing his gentle smile. At 45, he had been leading Mount Olive Baptist Church for 8 years, and he had a gift for knowing when his congregation needed him most. "Sister Agnes told me you might need some company," he said, setting the dish on the kitchen counter. "I brought my mama's famous mac and cheese." Jasmine had been avoiding church since the incident. She wasn't ready to face all the questions and sympathy from people who had known her and David as a couple. But Pastor Mike had a way of making everything feel safe and normal. "I keep wondering what I did wrong," she admitted as they sat in the living room. "What made him want to kill me instead of just leaving me?" Pastor Mike was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Jasmine, some people reach a point where they convince themselves that other people are obstacles instead of human beings. Your husband didn't see you as a person with feelings and dreams. He saw you as a problem to be solved. But we were married for 10 years. How do you just stop loving someone?" "I don't think he ever loved you the way you deserve to be loved," Pastor Mike said gently. "Real love doesn't turn into murder no matter what. Real love would have led to an honest conversation and a fair divorce." That evening, Jasmine made a decision that surprised even herself. She called Detective Rivera and asked if she could visit the bridge where David had pushed her. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" he asked. "I need to see it again. I need to understand what he was thinking." Detective Rivera met her at the bridge just before sunset. The October air was crisp, and the leaves had turned even more brilliant since her fall. Jasmine stood at the spot where David had pushed her and looked down at the dark water below. "The current carried me about 200 yards downstream," she said, pointing toward the willow trees. "But from up here you can't see that part of the riverbank." "He probably thought the water would carry me much further. Or that you wouldn't survive the fall at all," Detective Rivera added grimly. Jasmine walked slowly along the bridge, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't a crime of passion or a fight that got out of hand. David had chosen this location carefully. The bridge was isolated, with no houses nearby and very little traffic after dark. If she had died, it would have looked like suicide or an accident. "He stood right here afterward," she said, positioning herself where she remembered seeing David's silhouette. "He watched me go under, and he waited to make sure I wouldn't come back up." The realization hit her like a physical blow. David hadn't just tried to kill her, he had stood there and watched, waiting to confirm she was dead before leaving the scene. The man she had shared a bed with for 10 years had been capable of that level of coldness. But as the sun set behind the bridge, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Jasmine felt something unexpected. She had survived David's worst and she was still standing. He had thrown everything he had at her and she was still here. "I'm ready to fight back," she told Detective Rivera. The next morning brought unexpected news. David had been spotted at a motel in Tennessee, and local police had him under surveillance. Detective Rivera called just after breakfast with the update. "We can't arrest him yet. We need more evidence for the attempted murder charge. But we know where he is and we're watching him." "What about Rebecca?" Jasmine asked. "That's more complicated. We can prove she's having an affair with your husband, but unless we can show she was involved in planning the murder attempt, she hasn't committed a crime." Jasmine hung up feeling frustrated. David was hiding in Tennessee while Rebecca continued her normal life in the fancy apartment that David's construction salary could never afford. Something wasn't adding up. "Aunt Agnes, how does a woman who works at an insurance company afford a place like Riverview Apartments? Those units start at $1,800 a month." Sister Agnes looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Maybe she's got family money. Or maybe she's got something else going on." That afternoon, Jasmine did something that would have terrified the old version of herself. She drove to Riverview Apartments and parked across the street, waiting for Rebecca Stone to come home from work. At 5:47 p.m., A white Honda with a dented passenger door pulled into the parking lot. Jasmine watched as a tall, thin woman with straightened blonde hair got out of the car. Rebecca Stone was younger than Jasmine had expected, probably in her mid-20s with expensive-looking clothes and designer handbags. But it was what happened next that changed everything. A black Mercedes pulled up beside Rebecca's Honda, and an older white man in a business suit got out. Jasmine watched as Rebecca kissed him on the cheek and took an envelope from his hands. The man looked around nervously before getting back in his car and driving away quickly. Jasmine's heart pounded as she realized what she had just witnessed. Rebecca wasn't just having an affair with David. She was involved with at least 2 men and money was changing hands. She drove back to Sister Agnes' house with her mind racing. When she explained what she had seen, her aunt's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Child, I think your husband got himself mixed up with more than just a cheating woman. I think he got mixed up with someone who was already running games." That night, Jasmine couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the envelope, the nervous way the man had looked around, and Rebecca's expensive lifestyle. By morning she had formed a theory that made her stomach turn. David hadn't been the mastermind of the murder plot. He had been the tool. At 9 a.m. she called Detective Rivera with her suspicions. "I think Rebecca Stone convinced David to kill me. I think she's been manipulating him from the beginning." "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Brooks. Do you have any evidence?" "Not yet. But I'm going to get it." Detective Rivera was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Brooks, I need you to promise me you won't do anything dangerous. If Rebecca Stone is as manipulative as you think, she could be dangerous." "I promise I'll be careful. But Detective Rivera, I'm not going to sit here and let her get away with this. She convinced my husband to try to murder me so they could collect insurance money and start a new life together. I'm going to prove it." After she hung up, Jasmine sat at Sister Agnes' kitchen table and made a list of everything she needed to find out about Rebecca Stone. The woman had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated the wife she thought was dead. Jasmine was very much alive and she was about to show Rebecca Stone exactly what that meant. The Mount Olive Baptist Church Ladies Auxiliary met every Thursday afternoon in the fellowship hall, and Sister Agnes had been a member for 30 years. What most people didn't know was that the Ladies Auxiliary was also the most effective information network in the entire county. When Agnes Richardson needed to find out something about someone, she knew exactly where to go. "Ladies," Sister Agnes announced at the beginning of the meeting, "my niece needs our help." Within an hour, Jasmine had more information about Rebecca Stone than she could have gathered in weeks of investigation. Sister Dorothy's daughter worked at the insurance company downtown. Sister Martha's son-in-law was a mechanic who had worked on Rebecca's car. Sister Patricia knew Rebecca's landlord's wife. The picture that emerged was troubling. Rebecca Stone wasn't just a young woman having an affair. She was a woman with a pattern of targeting vulnerable men and extracting money from them through various schemes. "She got fired from her last job in Atlanta for insurance fraud," Sister Dorothy reported. "My daughter heard it from someone who used to work there. And she ain't been paying her rent regular," added Sister Martha. "The landlord's been talking about evicting her for months." But it was Sister Patricia who provided the most damaging information. "My friend works at First National Bank. She says Rebecca Stone has been depositing cash every week for the past 6 months. Sometimes $500, sometimes more. All cash, never checks." Jasmine felt the pieces clicking into place. Rebecca wasn't just manipulating David. She was running some kind of ongoing scam that required regular cash payments. David's life insurance policy on Jasmine was probably just one part of a larger scheme. That evening, Jasmine called Detective Rivera with the new information. He listened carefully and promised to look into Rebecca's background more thoroughly. "Mrs. Brooks, I have to ask, how did you get all this information so quickly?" Jasmine smiled for the first time in weeks. "Detective, you clearly don't understand the power of church ladies when they set their minds to something." The next morning brought shocking news. Detective Rivera called with an update on Rebecca Stone's criminal history. "You were right to be suspicious," he said. "Rebecca Stone has been arrested 3 times in 3 different states for insurance fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. She's never served serious time because she's always cooperated with prosecutors and testified against her partners. She betrays the men she manipulates? Every time. And Mrs. Brooks, there's something else you need to know. David isn't in Tennessee anymore. He's back in town and we think he's meeting with Rebecca today." Jasmine's blood ran cold. "Are you going to arrest him?" "We're watching them both. If we can catch them together discussing the insurance policy or the murder attempt, we'll have enough evidence to charge them both. I want to be there." Absolutely not. This could be dangerous. But Jasmine had made up her mind. She had been passive for too long, letting other people control her life and her story. If David and Rebecca were going to meet, she wanted to hear what they had to say to each other. Detective Rivera, that woman convinced my husband to try to kill me. She's been running scams on vulnerable men for years. I have a right to face them. After much argument, they reached a compromise. Jasmine could observe from a safe distance, in an unmarked police car with Detective Rivera, while other officers conducted surveillance. At 3 p.m., they parked across the street from Miller's Diner on the highway, a rundown restaurant where Rebecca and David had arranged to meet. Jasmine watched through binoculars as David's blue Ford truck pulled into the parking lot. He looked terrible. His hair was unwashed, his clothes wrinkled, and he moved like a man carrying an enormous weight. For a moment, Jasmine felt a flicker of the old sympathy she used to feel for him when he was struggling. Then she remembered the cold look in his eyes as he pushed her off the bridge, and the sympathy disappeared. Rebecca arrived 10 minutes later in her white Honda. Even from across the street, Jasmine could see that she looked angry. She marched into the diner with her shoulders set and her jaw clenched. "They've got audio equipment in the restaurant," Detective Rivera explained. "We should be able to hear everything they say." 20 minutes later, the surveillance team's radio crackled to life. Rebecca's voice came through clearly, sharp with anger. "You idiot. You told me she was dead." "I thought she was." David's voice sounded defeated. "She went over that bridge and disappeared under the water." "How was I supposed to know she could swim?" "Because it was your job to know. I planned everything perfectly and you screwed it up." Jasmine gripped the binoculars tighter, her hands shaking with rage. Rebecca had planned it. She had convinced David to commit murder, and she was angry that he had failed. Rebecca's voice continued, "Now the police are looking for you, the insurance company is suspicious, and I've got creditors breathing down my neck. You've ruined everything." "What are we going to do?" David asked. "We aren't going to do anything. You're going to disappear and I'm going to figure out how to salvage this mess." "And David? If you ever contact me again, I'll tell the police that killing your wife was entirely your idea." Detective Rivera looked at Jasmine with grim satisfaction. "We've got them both." The arrest happened quickly. As Rebecca and David left the diner, police cars surrounded them from all directions. Jasmine watched as her husband was handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car. He looked small and pathetic, nothing like the man who had terrorized her nightmares for weeks. Rebecca, on the other hand, was screaming at the officers and demanding to speak to a lawyer. Even in handcuffs, she carried herself like someone who expected to talk her way out of trouble. "She's done this before," Detective Rivera observed. "But this time is different." "Why?" "This time, her victims survived to tell the story." That evening, Jasmine sat in Sister Agnes' living room and watched the news coverage of the arrests. The reporter called it a twisted plot involving adultery, insurance fraud, and attempted murder. They showed photos of David and Rebecca being led away in handcuffs. But what struck Jasmine most was how ordinary they both looked. These were the people who had tried to erase her from the world, and they looked like any other couple you might see at the grocery store or gas station. "You did it, baby," Sister Agnes said, sitting down beside her on the couch. "You fought back and you won." Jasmine nodded, but she didn't feel victorious yet. The arrests were just the beginning. There would be trials, testimony, and months of legal proceedings. She would have to relive the worst night of her life in front of strangers and convince them that her own husband had tried to murder her. But for the first time since David pushed her off that bridge, Jasmine felt truly safe. The people who wanted to hurt her were in jail, and the truth was finally coming to light. Her phone rang and she saw Denise's number on the caller ID. "Girl, I just saw the news. Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," Jasmine replied and realized she meant it. "I'm free." As she talked to her best friend, explaining everything that had happened over the past few weeks, Jasmine caught sight of herself in Sister Agnes' hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had walked across that bridge 4 weeks ago. This woman had survived the unthinkable and fought back against people who had underestimated her. This woman was a survivor and she was ready to reclaim her life. 6 months later, Jasmine stood in the courthouse hallway, wearing her best navy blue dress and the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. The trial was finally over. David had been sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder, and Rebecca had received 12 years for conspiracy and insurance fraud. During the trial, the full extent of Rebecca's schemes had been revealed. She had been running insurance scams across multiple states, targeting lonely men and convincing them to take out policies on their wives or relatives. David had been her third victim, though he was the only one who had actually attempted murder. She preyed on his insecurities, the prosecutor had explained to the jury. She made him believe that his wife was holding him back from the life he deserved, and that murder was his only option for freedom. Jasmine had testified for 2 days, telling her story clearly and calmly. She had looked David in the eyes as she described falling from the bridge and fighting to survive in the cold water. He had cried, but she felt nothing. The man she had loved was gone, if he had ever really existed at all. Now, walking out of the courthouse with Sister Agnes, Pastor Mike, and half the congregation of Mount Olive Baptist Church, Jasmine felt like she could breathe completely for the first time in months. "What now, baby girl?" Sister Agnes asked as they stood on the courthouse steps. Jasmine smiled and pulled an envelope from her purse. "Now I start my new life." The envelope contained an acceptance letter from the paralegal program at the community college. Jasmine had decided that surviving David's murder attempt had given her a unique perspective on the legal system, and she wanted to use that experience to help other people. "I also have something else to tell you all," she said to the group of church members who had supported her through the entire ordeal. "I'm not going back to the house on Maple Street. I've decided to sell it and start fresh." Sister Agnes nodded approvingly. "That house got too many bad memories anyway. But I'm not moving far. I found a little apartment downtown, close to the college. And close enough to keep coming to Mount Olive every Sunday." Pastor Mike beamed. "We wouldn't have it any other way. Your family, Jasmine." That evening there was a celebration dinner at Sister Agnes' house. The dining room table that had served as their investigation headquarters was now covered with Sister Dorothy's fried chicken, Sister Martha's cornbread, and enough side dishes to feed the entire neighborhood. As Jasmine looked around the table at all the faces that had supported her through the darkest time of her life, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. These people had refused to let her face her ordeal alone. They had prayed for her, investigated for her, and stood by her when she needed them most. "I want to say something," she announced, standing up with her glass of sweet tea. 6 months ago I thought my life was over. I thought David had destroyed everything that mattered to me. But sitting here tonight, I realize he actually gave me something precious." She paused, looking at each person around the table. "He showed me who I really am. And he showed me who you all are. I always knew I had good people in my life, but I never knew I had people who would fight for me the way you all did." Sister Agnes wiped her eyes with her napkin. "Child, that's what family does. We show up. And we keep showing up," added Pastor Mike. "This community doesn't abandon its own." 2 weeks later, Jasmine moved into her new apartment on 3rd Street. It was small but bright, with big windows that let in lots of sunlight and a little balcony where she could grow herbs and flowers. For the first time in her adult life, she was living completely alone, and she discovered she loved it. She had decorated with things she actually liked, bright colors, plants, and books, instead of the neutral tones David had preferred. Her grandmother's quilt looked perfect on the bed, and her mother's china finally came out of storage to be displayed in the kitchen cabinet. On her first day of paralegal classes, Jasmine was nervous but excited. The instructor, Professor Williams, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had practiced family law for 20 years before transitioning to teaching. "This program is demanding," she told the class. "We're going to cover everything from legal research to client interviews to trial preparation. Some of you will find it too challenging and drop out. But those who stick with it will have the skills to make a real difference in people's lives." Jasmine thought about David and Rebecca sitting in their prison cells and smiled grimly. She was ready for the challenge. One afternoon in November, almost a year after the bridge incident, Jasmine was studying at her kitchen table when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Mrs. Brooks? This is Sarah Martinez. I'm a victim's advocate with the district attorney's office. I have an unusual request." Sarah explained that there was another case involving insurance fraud and domestic violence, and the victim was struggling to find the courage to testify against her abuser. "She heard about your case, about how you fought back and got justice. She asked if you might be willing to talk to her, to share your story." Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Of course. When and where?" Meeting with Lisa Chin, a woman whose husband had also tried to kill her for insurance money, was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Lisa was younger than Jasmine, barely 25, and she was terrified of facing her husband in court. "How did you find the strength?" she asked through tears. "I realized that staying silent meant letting him win," Jasmine replied. "And I decided I wasn't going to let him win. You don't have to let your husband win either." Lisa ended up testifying and her husband was convicted. It was the first of many similar conversations Jasmine would have over the following months. Word spread through the legal community that Jasmine Brooks was someone who could help other survivors find their voices. By the time she graduated from the paralegal program 18 months later, Jasmine had helped more than a dozen women navigate the legal system after domestic violence incidents. She had also been offered a job at Legal Aid, working specifically with domestic violence survivors. "You found your calling," Sister Agnes observed as they celebrated Jasmine's graduation at the church fellowship hall. "I think my calling found me," Jasmine replied. That evening, alone in her apartment, Jasmine opened a card that had arrived in the mail earlier that day. It was from Detective Rivera, who had moved to a different department but still kept in touch. "Jasmine," it read, "I wanted you to know that your case changed how our department handles domestic violence investigations. Your courage to fight back has helped protect other women. Thank you for showing us all what strength looks like." Jasmine set the card on her bookshelf, next to the framed photo of herself at graduation and the small trophy Pastor Mike had given her that read, "Survivor and Warrior." She walked out onto her balcony and looked up at the stars. It was a clear October night, exactly 2 years since David had pushed her off the bridge. The anniversary had been difficult, bringing back memories she thought she had processed completely. But standing there in the cool air, surrounded by the life she had built for herself, Jasmine felt only gratitude. David had tried to erase her, but instead he had revealed her true strength. Rebecca had tried to use her, but instead she had taught her to be suspicious of people who seemed too good to be true. The river had tried to drown her, but instead it had washed away the woman who was too trusting and too passive. The woman who remained was exactly who she was meant to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from Denise, "Proud of you, sister. Can't wait to see what amazing thing you do next." Jasmine smiled as she typed back, "Whatever it is, I know I can handle it." As she got ready for bed, Jasmine caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The scars from that night, physical and emotional, were still there, but they no longer defined her. They were simply part of her story, proof that she had survived something terrible and emerged stronger. Tomorrow she would start her new job, helping other survivors navigate their own journeys toward justice and healing. Next month she would speak at a conference for domestic violence advocates. Next year, who knows what opportunities would come her way. But tonight, she was simply a woman who had faced the worst and lived to tell about it. A woman who had learned that sometimes the people who try to destroy you actually give you exactly what you need to become who you were always meant to be. Jasmine Brooks had survived, and in surviving she had learned how to truly live,